Your bean row is covered in flowers this week, and almost nothing behind them is turning into a pod. I see this every August on bush and pole beans both, and the first two things I check are temperature and feeding. The plant looks incredible, thick and green, loaded with blooms, and growers reach for more fertilizer, thinking it just needs a push to finish the job. Start with the afternoon temperature, not the fertilizer bag. Check your afternoon temperatures for the last several days, not just today. If you have had a run of days above 85 degrees, about 29 Celsius, especially with warm nights on top of that, that is very likely your answer, and no amount of feeding fixes a flower that is dropping from heat. If your afternoons have stayed closer to 70 or 80 degrees, heat is not your problem, and the next check matters more than the first one. Walk the row and count blooms against pods on 3 or 4 branches. Plenty of flowers with almost nothing small forming behind them. On a plant that looks unusually lush and dark green with thick stems, points to too much nitrogen rather than heat. Stop feeding entirely the moment you see that pattern. Beans can pull part of their nitrogen through a partnership with bacteria living in nodules on their roots, so they usually do not need the heavy feeding that leafy crops tolerate. And extra fertilizer often backfires, pushing the plant into more leaf instead of more pod. Once temperatures stay around 90 degrees, about 32 Celsius, for several days in a row, especially when the nights stay hot too, bean flowers become much less likely to set pods reliably. Even before it gets that extreme, sustained heat can reduce successful flowering and pod set on its own, especially once the plant is also losing water faster than the roots can replace it. That is where the flowers get sacrificed first, before you see any other sign of stress on the plant. There is a real fix, even while you are stuck in the heat, not just a waiting game. Rig up light shade cloth over the row during the hottest hours. Look for cloth that blocks around 30 to 40% of sunlight. Just a few degrees of relief on the flowers themselves is often enough to stop some of them from dropping, even while the air stays hot. A folding patio umbrella can also give a short row some afternoon relief if you do not have shade cloth on hand, as long as it is moved to track the sun through the afternoon. Watering matters just as much as shade during a heat spell. Water deeply in the early morning so the roots have moisture banked before the afternoon heat hits, rather than watering in the evening after the day's damage is already done. Consistent soil moisture keeps the plant from adding drought stress on top of the heat, which is often what pushes borderline flowers into dropping instead of holding on. A couple of inches of mulch around the base, about 5 centimeters, helps that moisture stay put through the hottest part of the day instead of baking off before the roots can use it. If nitrogen turns out to be the real cause, patience matters more than any product. Stop applying anything labeled high in the first number on the bag, the nitrogen number, and let the plant work through what is already in the soil instead of trying to correct the problem with more water. Watch the new growth that comes in over the following week. New flowers opening on stems that are no longer pushing out excess leaf will set pods far more reliably than the ones opening right now on an overfed plant. If you added a nitrogen-heavy compost or manure earlier this season, that timing usually lines up with when the lush growth and poor pod set started, which is worth checking against your own notes. Heat and nitrogen are not the only two culprits. Uneven watering can drop flowers on its own, even when temperatures and nitrogen both look fine. A plant that dries out hard between waterings, then gets soaked, puts the same kind of stress on its flowers that mild heat does, just from a different direction. If your watering schedule has been inconsistent lately, more than the weather or the fertilizer, that inconsistency is worth fixing before you touch anything else. Still not sure which pattern you were dealing with? A side-by-side comparison settles it fast. Walk the row and compare 2 plants getting the same water and sun, one near the edge of the bed and one in the middle where airflow and soil can differ slightly. If every plant is dropping flowers about equally, heat becomes the stronger suspect, since it hits the whole bed the same way no matter which plant you look at. If one section is worse, and that section happens to be closer to where you spread compost or fertilizer this spring, nitrogen is the more likely culprit for that patch. There is one more visual check worth doing while you wait. since heat stress and nitrogen stress can look similar at first glance, but leave different clues in new growth. Heat-stressed plants tend to keep producing normal-sized new leaves, even while flowers drop, since the leaf tissue itself is not the problem. Nitrogen-heavy plants usually keep pushing out new leaves that are noticeably larger than the older growth further down the stem, sometimes with a darker, almost glossy green. If the newest leaves at the top of the plant look bigger and greener than everything below them, that means nitrogen, even if your temperatures have also been running warm. Pods that do form during a heat wave are worth watching too, since heat stress does not stop the moment a flower manages to set. Small pods that started developing on the hottest days sometimes stall and turn yellow or papery before reaching a pickable size. Shriveling young pods are the same heat stress continuing past the flowering stage, and the shade cloth and steady watering above help here just as much as they do at the flower stage. Some blossom drop early in the season is completely normal. Almost every bean plant sheds a handful of its first flowers before it settles into steady production, so do not panic over a few dropped blooms in the first couple weeks after flowering starts. What you are watching for is a pattern that continues heavily, week after week, not a one-time dip right at the start. If this heat wave has already wiped out several weeks of your first planting, and you are growing bush beans, it is not too late to start over. Check the seed packet for days to maturity and count backward from your area's average first frost date. If your remaining growing season is long enough for the variety to mature before that date, a fresh bush bean sowing can sometimes outproduce nursing a badly heat-stressed planting back to health. Pole beans need considerably longer to mature, so a late-season replant is usually only worth it for bush varieties this far into summer. Give this second sowing a spot with a little afternoon shade if you can, since the seedlings will be establishing right through the same heat that stressed your first planting. Time the new planting around the forecast, not just the calendar. If a stretch of cooler days is coming, that is the window to get seeds in the ground, so the seedlings spend their first vulnerable days in gentler conditions before facing whatever heat comes next. Water the new bed deeply right after sowing, and again once the seedlings emerge, since young bean plants are far more sensitive to a dry spell than an established plant already carrying flowers. While you are waiting out the heat, or the nitrogen reset, resist the urge to prune the plant back hard, even if it looks a little ragged from the stress. Cutting into a bean plant during flowering or early pod set adds another layer of stress right when it is already struggling to hold on to the blooms it has. It can push pod set back even further. Once pods reach full size, pick them regularly. Leaving mature pods on the plant can slow the production of new flowers and pods, especially on bush beans. Once the heat breaks and conditions become more comfortable for several days in a row, beans can start setting flowers and pods again. If the foliage still looks healthy and the roots have not been badly stressed by repeated swings between dry and wet, the plant often recovers without any extra feeding. Tell me in the comments what your afternoon temperatures have looked like this week, and whether your plant looks unusually lush with almost no pods, since those two details tell us which fix actually applies to your garden.